54% of small businesses actually do not have a budget, which is crazy to me because, in my opinion, how can you not have a plan? Like, how do you know where you are? So, obviously, this is my background. It's where I ground myself and where I'm able to know exactly where I am and how I'm progressing from a financial perspective. But if you never had a budget, I hear often entrepreneurs say, I do this from my gut. It's been serving me really well. You are not alone because 54% of other business owners also operate in that way. Here's one of the things that I hear that I think it's kind of crazy is I don't want to create a budget because I don't want to be limited and I don't want it taken away. The reality is you set the budget and it's not about use it or lose it. That's what the government is. And I'm not going political by any stretch of the imagination, especially in today's environment. But that's really not how a budget works. A budget is meant to give guardrails to say, here's what we think we're going to do for the year and give you a way to measure your progress along the way. Many businesses that have a budget can actually be more nimble because if you're ahead of budget and you can project where you think you're going to end the year, you can make decisions faster in that year to either hire, to adjust. If you're behind budget, same thing. You might pull back some of the things you thought you were going to start in June or July, but if your first quarter isn't going well, you can actually change those decisions and get yourself closer to budget if something didn't go the way that you thought you were going to do. So it really does empower someone to have this plan, have it in a format that you can actually compare where you are to where you thought you'd be as you move through the year. So, why does it matter? I just told you from my perspective why it matters, but we've actually seen that agencies that have a budget see an increase of 6 to 8% overall in their profitability just by paying attention and managing to a plan. Um, Oftentimes part of the I'm going to walk you through what those process are, but as you go through and look at what you spent last year, what you're trying to accomplish this year, and what investments you want to make in order to make your plan for this year happen, it's funny how you start rethinking some things that maybe you've done because you've always done them, but now you don't necessarily need them. That budgeting process allows you to examine many things that might have been in place for years and kind of on autopilot. So that's one of the reasons. But then as you measure and you think about things, it's always easier to perform better. If you're not measuring it and you're not looking at it, it's very difficult to know where you are. So this is why many agencies that have a budget, actually their performance is significantly higher. Why does this matter? Well, if you have a business and you follow anything that I say or do, you understand that your profitability or your EBITDA, operating profit, whatever words you want to use, is one of the numbers in the equation that determines the value of your agency. So if you're able to get 6 to 8% higher in your profitability, that is the number that gets multiplied times the multiples that everybody wants to talk about in order to get to the value of your agency. If that's a very, very significant increase that could mean significant things to an agency. So by having a budget and managing to it could mean significant increase in the value of your agency. And that is something I think everyone should pay attention to. So what are some of the why not have one, some challenges faced when agencies budget? So oftentimes when we start working with an agent, they say, I would like to um, I would like to grow by 10%, or I would like to hit a certain profitability, or I want to be a best practices agency, but they don't do any planning to determine how to get there. So sometimes the reason why a budget doesn't work is number one, you haven't really forecasted appropriately. You don't know where you've been or what it takes in order to get somewhere. So your plan, while it's great on paper, it's actually not supported by any type of information. Sometimes, once a budget is set, someone thinks I've got to adhere to it 100%. That's also not the case. It's meant to be guardrails. It's meant to say, this is the plan that I thought I needed in October of 2025. But in February of 2026, something might change that you want to invest in, shift to, consider. It allows you to see your whole plan for the year and where you might be able to borrow from one place in order to invest in another and reallocate and reforecast for the year. So think of the budget as the guardrails and the things that you can operate within for the year, and not as something that's completely inflexible. That's a mistake to think about it that way. There are some costs or things that happen inside your business that potentially you need to plan for. So we're in the middle of, we've just come out of a hard markets in some parts of the country. It's still a hard market and there's rate increases happening. In some parts of the country, we're actually seeing significant rate decreases and everything in between. Not paying attention to what's happening in the environment can actually cause you to not plan appropriately. So I just got off a call with an agency that's located in the South. They are coastal. They have about 50% of their business with E&S, and their budget and their retention rates for revenue retention is very different than it's been for the last 2 years with what's happening in their particular marketplace with their carriers. They are planning for rate decreases in their area. And without that planning, if they said, we're just going to do what we did last year, and actually put together a plan that makes no sense. If they plan to have the same revenue this year and built their expenses based on that revenue that they think they're going to have by ignoring what's happening around them, could actually put them at a pretty bad place. So they definitely have changed their approach given the fact that the market has changed over the last 3 months, actually the last 3 to 6 months in their area. So that is a mistake. If someone is not paying attention and they're just moving numbers forward from last year to this year, it could really put you in a bad situation. And the last is not adjusting for shifts. Let's say, you're in a market where you created a conservative budget for revenue and expenses. You're continuing to move along, but all of a sudden you actually are exceeding your budget, and the question comes up, can I hire somebody else? Can I add more service? Can I invest in a different way? If you didn't have a budget and you're not able to project for the year, you might hesitate and wait till the end of the year. But if you're managing and you're seeing like, okay, I made the assumption that my retention is going to be this number, my new business is going to be this number, and we're hitting all of those and it looks consistent, you would be able to adjust your decision making much earlier if you have that budget and you did the planning in order to put that in place. So those are some of the things that are challenges that people face when they create a budget and it's really nothing behind it, or they've never been trained to do it. So key components of a budget. Number one, you want to forecast your revenue and think about where the revenue's coming from. Number two, we want to look at the expenses. And while we utilize previous year as our guide, we actually add or subtract based on those things that are recurring, those things that still connect with our overall goals of the agency, things that we might want to add some things if we're adding a different focus for this year. And then we want to think about, with our plan for revenue and the ways that we think we're going to get there, with the investments that we want to make inside the agency when it comes to our people, our location, our systems, all of the things that we want to do, what does that leave us from a profitability standpoint? And how does that impact our cash flow based on the timing of the revenue and all of the expenses? You need to make sure, just because at the end it's a positive number doesn't mean in any given month that cash flow won't be different. So that is the step two after a budget, is to create a cash flow and make sure that you're accounting for what that'll look like for you and in your agency. I have some agencies that have heavy cash inflow at the beginning of the year, but the last quarter is slow, and we know that those are going to be negative numbers. If you've got your whole budget laid out and you know that, and you're ahead as of September, but October, November, December, you have more expenses than you have revenue, you're able to make really informed decisions. But if you don't know that, you could find yourself in a in a sticky situation, like an agent that I spoke to that said the owners just don't pay themselves for those months, which is not a great way to live and not a great way to plan. So this allows you to foresee that, plan for it, and actually not have to have that kind of ebb and flow inside your agency. So no, that's really the components that we're talking about. Then aligning your budget with your agency goals. Are you growth focused? Are you investing in marketing, hiring, expansion, etc.? You might, your budget might look like a short-term lower profit for the long-term gain. You might be operating at a lower profit margin because you have more unvalidated, producers than another agency, but you're making investments now knowing that that will pay off in the future versus another agency that might be stability focused. Maybe they're ready for a transition. They're going to transition ownership in the next 3 years, and they want to show that their agency can maximize their profitability. They might have their costs very predictable. Maybe profit margin is really the thing that they're focused on while maintaining a reasonable growth, but they might not be trying to hit the same growth and expansion metrics than a growth focused agency is. So it's not apples to apples. If you came to us, we aren't going to set the same budget for everyone. It really depends on where you are in your life cycle and what you're trying to accomplish over that time frame. So this is what I love thinking about a revenue forecast and predicting and driving growth inside an agency. So for instance, this is an agency that looks like we took their revenue for 2024 or for 2023, and we projected what their retention rate would be for 2024, what their new business and their retention would look like by month. And you can see we set a budget, and then we actually manage what is their actual in each of those months, what is their budget in each of those months, and say where we think we're going to end the year from a revenue standpoint. I said earlier that some agencies come to us and they say, we'd like to grow double digits. I want to make sure that we budget for a 10% growth rate. That's what we've done every year. That's what I want to do going forward. So our process would be, let's look at your book of business and how much revenue you booked in every single month last year. Let's apply a reasonable retention rate to that revenue, and then back into how much new business will you need to generate in order to get to a net growth rate of 10%. When we find that new business that's required to get to a 10% growth rate, our next exercise is, who are the people that generate new business? Who are the producers inside your agency that generate new business? And what did they produce last year? Are their goals different? And is there anything that makes you think that their new business generation will be different this year than it was last year, either higher or lower? Maybe someone went part-time, maybe someone's going to retire midway through the year, or maybe someone was brand new and they're in their validation schedule, and we knew that they were going to have higher goals this year than they had last year. It could be that you have a new lead source. All those things we contemplate. So we say, what is a reasonable expectation for all of the people generating new business based on what they did the prior year? And then your service people, if they have goals for cross-sell, upsell, put them in there to say, what are their goals and what does that look like? Come up with what that monthly amount is and compare it to what's needed for that 10% growth rate and see if you have a reasonable assumption there. If you're off, we either need to adjust the budget or the goal, or adjust the goals for the people in order to make sure that we can make that happen. But just saying we're going to grow by 10% isn't a plan. That's actually a really bad way to get yourself in a tricky situation. The last thing I'll say about this is, when you grow an agency and you're a $500,000 revenue agency and you grew to 700, and then you went from 700 to 810 and 810 to 950, etc. The larger you get, the harder it is to maintain that percentage growth rate that you've had prior, and not having a plan and expecting the same kind of situation is tricky. We also are in a hard market where rate helped us hit some of these growth rates, Now is one of the best times to have a budget in place to make sure it's true green growth that you're planning for, and you're not planning on rate that may not be there for you. So this whole budget to actual and coming up with what the revenue looks like is the first step in the budget, and then all the expense comes next. The overall goals for the agency is, if you want to hit a growth goal, you want to hit a profitability goal, you want to hire a certain number of people, you want to change agency management systems, all of those things need to be written down as goals, prioritized, and put into your budget. But first things first, let's make sure we have reasonable expectations on what the top line revenue is going to look like. Often get asked, that's fine for commission and fee income. What about contingencies? How do I plan for things that are variable? And the answer I would say is those questions we put our agents through as we build their budgets. We look at their 5-year trend of where their contingencies are, and we ask ourselves, is anything changed? If you're part of a network, cluster, or alliance, that contingency is based on more than just you, we're going to look at a trend and we're going to be conservative with what that number is. Never count on something that you may not have. So if it's trending around, 10% of your revenue is what you get in contingencies, maybe budget for 7 or maybe 6. The second thing is, if an agent has, by the time we're creating their budget, if they've locked in, we know that we can put those dollar amounts there. So there might be some that we can put in the budget safely, and others that are variable that we discount or we put a reasonable amount there. The last part of that is, if there's a carrier change, or they know that somebody has changed the calculation on how contingencies are or bonuses are calculated, we look at that book and we discount and apply the new assumptions to come up with a reasonable, not using your trend before, but actually looking at the book in a different way. So making sure that you don't arbitrarily pull something forward that won't be there and can't be counted upon is incredibly important. Other income is the same way. I had an agent that was selling to the next generation, and they had interest income that was significant because they kept a pretty healthy balance sheet. But when they sold to the next generation, a lot of that cash went with the exiting owner, and there wasn't interest income any longer. So we got to look line by line and say, is this still reasonable to think that this will be here? And if it's not, make sure that we're paying attention to it and not counting on something that is no longer the case. So that is the revenue side. The other thing I will show you is, it's incredibly important to track your revenue retention and know what's coming from new and what's coming from renewal. This is a really important thing, and there's a lot of agencies, because they don't have a process in place to capture rewrites in an appropriate way, their new and their renewal, or their new and their lost business, is actually skewed, making their renewal numbers not appropriate. So setting that renewal amount, if you think about it, that's where so much of your revenue, over 90% of your revenue, is coming from renewal income. If you don't know the right renewal rate to apply because you're not tracking it appropriately, it makes it really difficult to actually plan for the following year. Now, in soft markets, this is less important, but in a market where there's rate, and or you're coming off of a hard market where rate is declining, it becomes far more important. So understand
Yeah, why?
how to predict that is incredibly important. So I want to point that out. And if you don't know how to really project what your revenue retention is, that's actually been in the last webinar, if I'm not mistaken, but reach out to us. We'll give you the calculation, or we'll give you the recording of the presentation that was all about that. So we're trying to hit these key things that so many people don't have when we go to value an agency and we ask for their retention rates. So many agencies don't have that. So we spent some time thinking about revenue retention. How do you calculate it? Policy retention. How do you calculate it? And customer retention and premium retention. All of it's the same calculation, but it is dependent on having a solid process in place to make sure that your data is clean. So once we get the revenue set, we turn to what are the investments that we need in order to accomplish the goals that the agency has for the future year. So it could be many different things. And, I listed a couple different examples of what goals are that agents come to us and say, but then there are some places that we should dive into to make sure that the expenses are optimized, we aren't overspending. Sometimes there are discretionary expenses included in a budget for tax purposes, knowing what those amounts are. So you might be able to reallocate and really make sure that you're hitting your goals is important things. So here are some common areas where agents might be overspending, they might be overinvesting, they might be autopilot investing and really need to think about it in a different way. So for instance, I have a really great client. He loves tech. He loves the shiny new toys. He goes to the conferences, and when an agent says they're using it, he wants to try it too. We went through his technology budget, and he had a meeting with his staff to say which technology you're actually using and what impact has it made on your job. They do this technology audit every 6 months in his agency. Some agencies do it every quarter in order to say, well, I thought it was a super cool tool. If nobody's using it and it's not giving us the outcome that we want, maybe we should eliminate it and be really thoughtful about the next time we bring something on, vetting it before we go through that process again. So technology is a place where sometimes expenses are on autopilot, and you might be able to find some alternative solutions or eliminate some solutions that you're just trying out. Marketing is the same thing. If an agency is growing double digits and their marketing is producing the results that they need, I would never suggest to change it. But if you don't know what you're getting from the investments that you're doing in marketing, you should probably ask yourself, is there a way for me to track this? Is there a way for me to see what my ROI is? Or is there a way for me to think about, is this getting me where I need to go? Is it generating the leads? Are those leads closing at the highest rate? Are there other opportunities that I'm missing because I have this on autopilot, or it's the way we've always done it? Occupancy is your rent, your utilities, your maintenance of your building, all the things that go with maintaining the space with which your people operate. And it's also a way that an agency owner can compensate themselves if they own the building. So making sure that that is an appropriate amount, or knowing what the appropriate amount would be, and knowing in your mind if you were ever to exit or sell, that adjustment would go to your profitability and really would be more profit, not compensation to you as an owner. So knowing that differential is important, but occupancy can be an area where there are some opportunities to optimize. Compensation is the biggest one. People make up 50% at a minimum of your P&L typically. So if your comp structure is off, oftentimes it would be difficult to make up the difference elsewhere. So knowing what your roles are, what the going rate is for those roles, what the new and renewal commission rates are for producers, um, what that, should I pay a producer a base pay plus new and plus renewal, and for how long? What the minimum thresholds are for a producer? How should I pay account managers? Should I bonus them or pay them commission on the new business that they write? All of the states did this unbelievable compensation study. And if you're part of a big I and you didn't participate in that, reach out to them, because there is a compensation study available for you that you can sort by state to look at your information in a pretty significant way. There's also compensation with the Insurance Journal. They publish compensation information. We actually collect compensation information. We value several agencies, about 200 agencies a year. Plus, we have data from working with fractional CFOs. So there is plenty of data in order to get informed about what comp structure should be, best practices. You can download the best practices report. You have to pay for it in order to know what those comp structures are, but please seek out information to know, am I compensating appropriately? Setting your budget is one thing, and knowing how much you're spending in each category is really important. But if you're off in one of these areas, it's an opportunity to work on it for a period of time as you, the owner, not when you're ready to exit or sell. If you wait to correct compensation, it could create a problem with the value of your agency, the continuity in your staff, their ability to stay on after you exit, etc., which all is pretty significant impact on the value of your agency. So that area in and of itself needs some time, love, and attention from everyone. Couple other places that I think are pretty easy to understand, but sometimes there's travel and entertainment that includes some discretionary expenses or just expenses that might, you never really looked at them in its totality and thought about what is the plan for travel? How many events are we going to go to? How many times are we going to make a plan to go out and meet with our referral partners? What does that actually calculate out to by year? And are we tracking appropriately, or are we just doing it as we feel and there really is no plan? So by looking at it, by going through this budgeting process, you can actually, it's creating an opportunity to create a plan that makes sense and actually is aligned with what you're trying to do. And same thing with membership and dues. If you're part of a network, cluster, or alliance, that's where those dues would go, or those membership fees. Same thing if you have some discretionary expenses, maybe there's a membership to a club or etc. Identifying what is maybe not serving your purpose will allow you the opportunity to reallocate some of that money through this process. I said comparing to benchmarks is really important. This is an example of how to do this. Let's say we created this budget for this agency, went through all the process, came up with what their commission and fees were going to be, what we thought their other income was going to be, and their $1.4 million dollar agency. We came up with their employee list and their compensation and benefits. And we then took each of these categories of expenses and divided each category by the total revenue for the agency to get a percentage. That percentage of revenue is what you would compare to these benchmarks, like in a best practices report, etc., to know, am I spending more or less than another agency is in each of these categories? And by asking yourself that, it's not that it's right or wrong. It's just, this is how my agency is structured. Number one, is it positioning me to make my goals come true? But number two, how do I compare to other agencies my size? And should I rethink something as I'm looking through how I do this versus how other agencies do this? So it's really just, again, a guardrail for you to ask yourself a question and maybe dig into an area that others others might be thinking differently. So, oh, hang on a second. You're answering questions for me, Lindsay? Yeah, cool. Anyway, so my point is, if the percentage of revenue is out of whack, it gives you an opportunity to think about it differently. And that's how you get to compare the benchmarks to something that's inside your agency. Oftentimes people are like, I open those reports, there's a whole bunch of percentages. I don't have a clue what they're talking about. So I'm trying to just help you know, how do you get to the percentages and use those reports to your benefit. Okay, so let's look at what some actual versus benchmarks might look like. I'm going to use payroll
Before you
as an
move
example.
on, can I pause you before you
Yeah,
move? Can you
please.
go? Christy was asking what percentage should payroll make up?
Yeah.
Can you just talk a little
Yeah.
bit about that?
So in this agency, they actually, you can see their payroll is 54.2% of their agency. The benchmark says it should be 47.6. Then their benefits make up 7% of their revenue. The benchmark says it should be 8.8. their total compensation makes up 61.2, where the benchmark says it should be somewhere around 56.4. So those benchmarks change based on the size of your agency. If you're an agency on this call and you're 750 in revenue, your benchmarks will be different. But that's what this particular benchmark that we're showing, it's rule of thumb, it should be somewhere around 50%. Here's the exceptions. If you're a tech forward agency and you're investing in a whole bunch of tech to make you far more efficient, you should take less people to do the same amount of work if your tech is working for you. On the flip side, if you're an agency that is not tech forward, but maybe you're really focused in one niche, you might be highly efficient and different than another agency that is not in a generalist. So you have to take it with a grain of salt, but the rule of thumb is somewhere around 50%. I do include owner's compensation in the calculation. It's a fantastic question. I include a reasonable amount of ownership. So I do not include your distributions, only what it would be reasonable to pay someone in that size. So what the IRS requires you to put on your P&L as an owner to make sure that we're covering that role. Super great question. Any other questions about benchmarking, compensation is its own beast. We'll do a whole thing on compensation for sure. That's something we repeat every single year because it's such a big topic. But remember, as you put this plan and you put it as a percentage of revenue, it helps you see the whole picture and not individual decisions about where you're investing your money inside your agency, and helps pull the whole thing together and then give you a benchmark to say, but how do I compare against the rest of the 40,000 independent insurance agencies that are out there, or the ones that are my size? Okay, cool. I love that you're asking questions. All right. So actual versus benchmarks, we kind of did this. We're showing you that the payroll is 760 and 54. These benchmarks is where we want to pay attention to. So it's basically saying we're 6.6% higher than the benchmark when it comes to just the payroll amount. In benefits, we're actually lower than the benchmark. Overall, we're actually 4.8% higher than the benchmarks, which means my profitability for an agency that doesn't have the structure, all other things being equal, will be 4.8% lower profitability than another agency that's able to manage this in a different way. But I have to take the whole thing into perspective. The last thing I'll say about payroll is, if you're a growing agency and you're investing in growth and you have unvalidated producers, you'll never be at the benchmark. You're always going to have more expense there because you're investing in the future, but that doesn't mean your profitability will be off, because you'll also have higher growth. So remember, no one benchmark is more important than the other. You have to consider your performance in both growth and profitability, as well as all these benchmarks. I was once invited to be on a podcast, and I love that they asked me, well, give me the benchmark for technology, and give me the benchmark for payroll, and give me the benchmark for whatever. And I said, I hate that question, because it really does depend where you are in your life cycle and what you're doing and how they all work together. So just remember, no one benchmark is more important than the other, but it has to be in context with, are you growing? Is that where your focus is? And are you able to do it profitably? And even if maybe you're not able to do it this year profitably, but can we, as we project out and expect to get the return on some of the investments over that time? So that this budgeting process should be able to help you pull all those things together. This is an example of, how does it look from, when I think about my technology, my people investments, and my outsourced services? Am I outsourcing all of my accounting and all of my service versus another agency that isn't? I should have less payroll expenses than someone that has outsourced their service or outsourced their accounting. So you have to take into account not just the payroll amount, but also what's the IT expense, and am I as efficient as I should be? Right here, this agency is right at the benchmark. They're slightly over, but they're right at. But if they were double the benchmark, you should ask yourself, Is my technology doing what I need it to do? And then I'd say, how about, am I outsourcing? They're not. They're actually doing everything in-house. There's a very small amount that's outsourced, but for someone that's outsourcing service, this would be a double-digit expense on their thing, and it should potentially take the place of some of their payroll expense if they're actually outsourcing and farming it out to someone. One of the one of the most common things to outsource is accounting. You might not have an office manager if you outsource your accounting, or your owner might be way more productive. Professional fees is where they might actually this is the accounting. My bad. That's actually, this agency is outsourcing their accounting, so they shouldn't have the same high amount of payroll because they're replacing one of their internal roles with outsourcing. Sorry, I forgot. Got a little ahead of myself. So my point is, some of the numbers work together, and you have to know what your story is compared to what you're comparing to. But all of those create a different profitability expectation and growth expectation for an agency. If you don't know how to classify your expenses into the categories and you want to use these benchmarks that are included in best practices, take this guide and give it to your person who does your accounting to classify your expenses in the categories. So now you're comparing apples to apples. You can just use this QR code, download it. It's free. It's a guide. I want people to have clean financials that actually drive them to great decisions. So this is for you. You can use it at your own discretion. Okay. And if you need it afterwards, it'll be in the recording, or Lindsay will provide it to you. No problem. Common budget mistakes: overestimating your revenue. Be realistic about what people can do and break it down by person. Once you have that, it's so easy to manage and look at throughout the year. If it's just a random number you've picked, please don't do that. That's the easiest way to get into trouble. Underestimating your expenses, or not managing and thinking about how this fits in your overall budget. If you're going to add an expense, you might want to take away an expense somewhere else, or think about it differently, especially if your performance is a bit different. Ignoring the seasonality of your agency can be a really big cash flow problem, especially for agents that have things like uh, life and health, or they might have bonds, or they might have crop, like where they have a big cyclical thing that's occurring in their agency. Ignoring that seasonality and not thinking about when the revenue happens, when your expenses happen, and or over reliance on contingency is another way to say that as well. So not reviewing or adjusting the budget could be a huge mistake. If you do all this work and you're not looking to budget to actual, and you're not digging in to figure out why there's variances, it's really not telling you a story, and it's really not serving you well. So those are some of the common mistakes. The way to do this is really look at it on a monthly basis. Thinking about it. Hey, Linz, can you help that QR code for me? Thank you. And make sure that everyone here is able to get that resource if they want it. That'd be great. Awesome. All right. So agencies often report strong top line numbers, but retention isn't tracked or analyzed. So you might be leaking clients and don't know it. If an agency is growing like this, but they're not paying attention to client retention, as rates increase, and they might actually have a false sense of, I'm doing better than what I thought I was. Hard market definitely created that, and they're not sure what their true organic growth rate is. That hard market made it look like they were growing, but they're actually flat if they're thinking about it, and it really was just a swell in their book. As the market corrects or comes down, that could actually create some pretty big, significant challenges for an agency that's not aware of that. Or someone who's acquiring. They keep adding revenue through acquisition, but they really don't see that, are they profitable or not, because it takes a full year to recognize that. Could actually also change your performance. Staff efficiency isn't measured, especially with underutilized tech. So these are some common things that occur that cause profitability to be off, or a false sense of, I'm doing better than what I thought I was. What gets measured gets managed. So having this plan allows you to measure where you are and think about your agency on a different level. and really move into business ownership rather than just I'm trying to sell insurance and do all the things. It allows you to work on your business, not just in your business, and really see the full picture. Steps to build and maintain a strong budget is number one, look at your last year's financials. Get that detail of everything that you did, get it classified into the benchmarks, and then ask yourself, are we going to repeat this? Was it beneficial? Do we actually need this? Does it align with the goals that I have for my agency going forward? Is it serving the goal, or are there other things that would serve me better? Oftentimes a decision to continue is something you have to think about it. That's also a decision not to invest in another area. And what is the opportunity cost of that? So really being thoughtful about what are the things that we're doing. If you don't know what they are, involve your team to find out how beneficial it is. And then once you set the budget, track your performance monthly and build in a buffer for any of those things that might be unexpected. I was just got off a call with an agency. I love them to death, and we were talking about their 2026 budget. We underestimated their revenue and we overestimated their expenses in order to create a buffer that means this is an achievable budget. We went through the whole process, but we didn't put the full goals of all their producers in there. We allowed for a 20% variance in their production. We also did the same thing with their expenses. We didn't add 20% more of their expenses, but we definitely added a 3.5% increase to their expenses to make sure that things that we don't know today. I do not know what's going to happen in June and who's going to raise their expenses for me, but I've given myself some room. We also do the same thing with raises for employees. I might not raise everybody, but I put a buffer in there so I can compensate my people. So anyway, underestimate revenue, overestimate expenses, and then track your performance monthly. We do have a budget template. I sure hope that this QR code happens or works. And if not, we'll make sure that we can get it to you. Um, so Robert asked me to go over the sources for benchmarking. Absolutely. Best practices, if you're part of Big I National IIABA, you can go on their website and look for the best practices report. It's on there. You pay a fee for it. I think it's $129. I shouldn't do that, but I think that it's something like that where you can go get that. And that's the report that'll show you the percentage of revenue for each of these categories. Other benchmarking for compensation, you can go to your local Big I. There's a comp study that just came out. There's also Insurance Journal has information about compensation and capacity expectations for your teams. I'm trying to think if there's any others. We have benchmarking that we use in our everyday. Soon we'll be publishing those, but that's not something that our customers get from us all the time. Lindsay, did I forget any of them? I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Awesome.
Oh, I think you covered it.
All right. Are there any other questions or things that I flew through this intentionally because I really did want to just give an overview of a budget and the things to think about? We have some resources for you, but if there's other questions, please feel free to say them now so the group gets the benefit of hearing your thoughts. Nothing, huh? I'm just kidding. Well, how about that? Well, I hope everybody has a budget. Everybody is planning for next year. I hope that if you need help, reach out to our team. It's what we do. We get to see lots and lots and lots of agencies where you guys get to see your agency. So if you've got a question, that's what our team is here to help for. So I encourage you to reach out. Hopefully you found benefit in this. If you have ideas of other topics you'd love for us to cover, we are all ears. Lindsay would love to hear from you. Please tell her, and we will have future webinars on those topics as well.
So we got a question in the chat here that says, this might be a future topic and might sound dumb. Nothing ever sounds dumb.
Never.
When you have the budget set, how do you use it?
Yeah, that's not a dumb question. Your budget is built for an annual, but it's also built monthly. So when you run your financials, you compare your financial situation by month to your monthly budget to say, am I tracking higher or lower at any given point throughout the year? The second thing the budget does for you is if you know something has changed, you can then forecast or move expenses maybe later in the year. You might, it allows you to have a planning tool for the entire year. What makes it powerful is comparing to it to where you are actually in the year and what you still have left in your budget and what you think you'll need in order to finish the budget. So this agency template, budget template allows you to do that. It actually breaks your budget down by month, allows you to plug in your actual by month, and you can compare it to your budget by month and where you stand. It's meant to be a really simple, it's built in Excel, but that's how you use a budget as a living, breathing item. You don't change the budget, you'll change your forecast for the end of the year. Hopefully I answered your question. And that's definitely not a dumb question. If you go through the trouble of building this thing and you don't know how to actually make it part of your every month planning, I've failed miserably. So I'm so glad you asked. Any other questions or thoughts, things that I should have covered that you think the group would benefit from, whatever it is, I'm happy to hear it.